Hello friends, welcome to my channel Angrezi Sahitya. Today, we are going to dive into Russian formalism, a fascinating theory that changed the way we read and think about poems, stories, and all kinds of writing. So, let's jump in. So, what is Russian formalism? Russian formalism is a way to study literature. It is a way people started studying literature in Russia between 1910 and 1930. The big idea is this: when we read a poem or a story, we should focus on how it is written, not what the writer felt, or what the story means, or what was happening in history at that time. So, what does how it is written mean? That's called form. It includes the words the writer chose, how the sentences sound, how the story is built, the style of writing, basically, all the technical stuff that makes the writing feel different from everyday talking. Russian formalists said that literature isn't like normal language. When we read a novel or a poem, it should feel a bit strange or special. This strangeness is done on purpose. It helps us see the world in a new way. This idea is called defamiliarization. It just means making the familiar seem new or fresh again. For example, if I say the sky is blue, you won't think much. But if I say the sky is a giant sheet of sadness, that sounds new and interesting, right? It makes you stop and think. That's defamiliarization. So, Russian formalism helps us understand what makes writing artistic. It tells us to pay attention to the tools writers use, not just the message they are trying to give. So, friends, let's take a quick trip back in time to early 1900s Russia. It was a period of big changes. There were revolutions, wars, and lots of new ideas. People were thinking differently, not just about politics, but also about art and literature. During this time, some smart young scholars said, let's study literature the way we study science, with logic, rules, and close observation. Just like we look at cells under a microscope in biology, they wanted to look closely at the words and structure in poems and stories. They also had a bold idea: stop focusing on the writer's feelings or the history around the book. Just look at the writing itself, the sounds, the patterns, and how it's put together. This idea was very fresh and new back then. There were two important groups that started this movement. First, the Moscow Linguistic Circle, a group of people who studied how language works. Second, OPAZES, which stands for Society for the Study of Poetic Language. They focused on what makes poetry different from normal speech. Together, these groups started what we now call Russian formalism, and they completely changed how people studied literature. Now, friends, let's meet some of the big names behind Russian formalism. The people who came up with all these cool ideas about how to study literature. Think of them like the superheroes of this moment. First, we have Victor Slowski. He gave us the idea of defamiliarization. Remember, that's when writers make things feel strange or new, so we look at them differently. He believed this is what makes art special. Next is Roman Jakobson. He was a language expert or linguist. He said we should study literature by looking at how language is used, the patterns, the sounds, and the structure, not just the meaning. Then there is Boris Eichenbaum. He said we should stop asking what does this story mean and instead ask how does this story work. He wanted to you understand the mechanism of writing like a mechanic looks inside a car engine. Finally, Yuri Tynebov believed that literature doesn't stay the same, it keeps changing over time, just like fashion or technology. He studied how new styles of writing replaced older ones. These four thinkers helped create Russian formalism and gave us new ways to read and enjoy literature. Cool, right? Now, let's look at the main ideas of Russian formalism, the big concepts that make this theory special. Don't worry, I'll explain them in the easiest way possible. The first idea is defamiliarization. This is the most famous one. It means making something feel new or strange so we notice it more. For example, if I say the moon is a silver coin floating in the sky, it sounds more magical than just saying the moon is round. The writer makes us feel the image, not just see it. That's defamiliarization, making the ordinary feel extraordinary. The second idea is literariness. This means the things that make writing feel like literature. Not all writing is literary, like a text message or news article. But when a poem uses rhyme, rhythm, metaphors, or unusual language, it becomes literary. Formalists wanted to find out what makes literature different from other writing. Another big idea is form over content. Content is what the story is about, like love, war, or sadness. But form is how the story is told. The words, the structure, the rhythm. Formalists said the form is more important. Instead of asking, what does this mean? They asked, how is it written? That's how they studied literature. So, Russian formalism is all about looking closely at how a story or a poem is made, the tools, the techniques, the structure. It's like being a detective of language. Now, let's talk about how the Russian formalists actually studied literature. What did they do when they read a poem or a short story? Well, they didn't just read for fun, they read very carefully, like scientists. They looked at every little part of the text, the sounds, the words, the way sentences were built, and how the story was put together. This is called close reading. It means paying attention to every detail, not just reading quickly. They also use tools from linguistics, which is study of language. So they look at things like rhyme and rhythm in poetry, repetition of sounds or words, the order of events in a story, how language creates surprise or emotion. For the formalist, a poem wasn't just something pretty. It was like a machine made of words, and they wanted to understand how that machine worked. So remember, Russian formalists didn't care much about the author's life or feelings. They care about how the writing was built, like how an architect studied the design of a building. Now, let's talk about how Russian formalism influenced the world and also the criticism it faced. Even though Russian formalism was popular for a while, by the 1930s, it started to face criticism, especially from the Soviet government in Russia. The government didn't like how formalists focused so much on form and ignored the meaning of the story. They believed that literature should help spread political messages, not just be about structure or beauty. But even with this criticism, Russian formalism didn't disappear. In fact, it influenced many later theories about literature. Later movements like structuralism, post-structuralism, and even new criticism built on some of the ideas formalists created. For example, structuralism was all about looking at how language works in a text, just like the formalists did. Even though formalists are not the main theory today, we still use their ideas when we study literature. Whenever we focus on language, style, or structure, we are using a little bit of Russian formalism. So, while formalism isn't as popular now, it is still left a big mark on how we read and think about literature today. Now, friends, let's put what we have learned into practice. We are going to look at an example and do a formalist analysis of it. Don't worry, I'll guide you step by step. Let's say we are reading this short poem. The sun is a coin thrown in the sky. It melts the snow with a fiery sigh. A Russian formalist would focus on the form of the poem, how it's written, not what the poet felt or meant. First, let's look at the words. The poet calls the sun a coin, which is a metaphor. That's a special way of describing something by saying it is something else. Why is the sun a coin? Maybe it's because coins are shiny and the sun shines in the sky. Next, we can pay attention to the sounds. Notice how the words sky and shy sound familiar. This is called alliteration, the repetition of sounds. It makes the poem feel smoother and adds a musical quality to it. Now, let's look at the structure. The poem has a short, simple lines. This keeps the poem moving quickly like the sun moving across the sky. The short lines also give the poem a light, airy feeling, just like sunlight. A formalist would also notice how the imagery is used. The image of the sun melting the snow with a fiery shy is very vivid and emotional. The poet is using a specific language to create a strong mental picture. So, when we read the poem this way, we are focusing on how the language structure and sounds work together. We are not asking what is the poet trying to say, we are asking how does the poet say it. Now that we have learned a lot about Russian formalism, let's talk about why it's important. First, Russian formalism helped us become better readers. It taught us to focus on the form of writing, how it's made, how the word sounds and structure work together to create an effect. This is super helpful because it helps us look deeper into a text and really understand how it works. It also changed the way people studied literature. Before formalism, people would mostly focus on the meaning of a text, like what the writer was trying to say or what happened in history. But Russian formalists showed us that the way something is written is just as important as what it says. This idea opened the door for more scientific and precise ways of studying literature. Friends, even though Russian formalism isn't as popular today, its influence is still with us. When we study poetry, stories, or even movies, we often look at how the structure and language are used. So, formalism gave us the tools to analyze art in a new way. So, in short, Russian formalism help us understand that literature isn't just about meaning, it's about how the writer shapes the message. And that's why it is still important to us today. That's the wrap on Russian formalism. Thanks for going through this with me. If you have any questions or want to dive deeper into any part, just let me know. Thanks for watching, friends. I hope you now have a deeper understanding of Russian formalism and how it can help us look at literature with fresh eyes. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more easy to understand lessons on literary theories. See you in the next one.